So, dear beloved community, it is such a joy to be together with you on this, the 9th day of August in the year 2020. I hope everybody's doing well wherever you might find yourself. Here in the Blue Mountains, not very far from here, we're actually experiencing a little snow. So for those of you in the Northern Hemisphere, please enjoy your warmth. We're definitely enjoying the few flakes of snow that are appearing here in this desert country. We've had such a beautiful day of mindfulness here in Mountain Spring. And as we were enjoying this day here, a poem that I haven't thought of for a number of years came to me. It came back into my consciousness, and it seemed appropriate to share it today, since we're going to be exploring the next factor of the Noble Eightfold Path, the factor of right effort. So this poem is a poem by William Stafford, and it's called Any Morning. Just lying on the couch and being happy, only humming a little, the quiet sound in the head. Trouble is busy elsewhere at the moment. It has so much to do in the world. People who might judge are mostly asleep. They can't monitor you all the time, and sometimes they forget. When dawn flows over the hedge, you can get up and act busy. Little corners like this, pieces of heaven left lying around, can be picked up and saved. People won't even see that you have them. They're so light and easy to hide. Later in the day, you can act like all the others. You can shake your head. You can frown. I love this poem so much. I gave a Dharma talk about it many years ago. But today, as it came into my consciousness, I was reminded of a talk that Tay, our teacher, gave back in, I think it was the end of 2002, was a couple of weeks before New Year. And he gave a talk in which he invited us as practitioners to develop the capacity to dwell in the space outside of space and the time outside of time. To be able, whilst we go throughout our everyday lives, the tasks that we need to do, the encounters that we have, the people that we meet, and the responsibilities we need to take care of, to never neglect the capacity to dwell in the space outside of space and the time outside of time. A few weeks back, I shared about the phrase that's often repeated in the text by those who have an awakening experience. Often we see this phrase repeated. It's, I've done what needed to be done. If we're really honest, most of our time is spent doing in what's maybe not so necessary to be done. What from an ultimate level needs to be done by you in order to transform your life, your mind, and your heart? If we're honest, we're pretty good at answering that question for everybody else. We know what everybody else needs to do in order to transform their mind, their heart, their life, their situation. But now, this week, we have an opportunity to reflect on how we would respond to that question. What do we need to do from an ultimate level in order to transform our life, our mind, and our heart? This is an invitation for each of us. It's also the invitation of the Buddha. This week, in our reflections on the Noble Eightfold Path, we move to the Samadhi or concentration section, the Samadhi Kanda, the body of Samadhi of the Noble Eightfold Path. And it builds on the firm foundation of the 3 factors of the ethics section that we've been exploring over the past 3 weeks. Remember that in the simplest terms, the simplest possible terms, the view of the Buddha is that mindfulness is as mindfulness does. It's not a feeling, it's not a breakfast cereal, it's not a perfume, it's not just a generalized frame of mind, but mindfulness is always mindfulness applied to something. Whether it's mindfulness of breathing, mindfulness of our steps, Mindfulness of our words, our interactions, mindfulness of the sensations in the body, and so on. The energy of mindfulness, this energy of deep presence, must infiltrate the whole of our lives. Otherwise, really, it's just a hobby. It's yet another thing that we do and another thing that we have on the endless to-do list, rather than something that we are, something that transforms our being, something that we become. This week, we move to an exploration of the next phase of practice, which moves from the transformation of mind and heart through ethics to direct mental training, to directly focusing on training our mind. And it comprises the three factors of right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration, or right immersion. This section of the path, the Sila Kanda, or the concentration section, the immersion section, gains its name from its focus, which is developing the skill and the power of sustained concentration, sustained immersion. And this is both a support for and a fruit of insight. It both generates and it is the fruit of insight. Again, this wonderful feedback loop that we often discover on the path of practice. Of course, prajna, or wisdom, is the primary tool for transforming our mind and our heart. But this deep and penetrating vision, this view from within, only opens up when our mind has been composed and collected. Back in the year 2000, speaking of composed and collected, back in the year 2000, a major tech corporation, I'll leave it up to you to discover which tech corporation, conducted a study measuring how long people can focus on one thing for a specific amount of time. The results showed that at that time, back in the year 2000, the average attention span was 12 seconds. The study was repeated in 2015, and at that time, it had dropped down to 8 seconds. In the succeeding 5 years, it's dropped even lower. In fact, a recent study from the Technical University of Denmark suggests that our collective global attention span is narrowing because of the abundance of information that's presented to us. So much demands our attention that we can only focus on each new trend for a short time. These are very interesting studies on attention spans. I'll post the link to some of those studies in the Compassionate Ocean Sangha Facebook group for you to read. There's an essay that I find it speaks to the heart of this issue, the issue of attention spans. Now, there's a lot of different information and different interpretations on whether decreasing length of attention span is actually a positive thing or whether it's not such a positive thing. I would say from the basis of the Buddha's perspective, we would definitely want to have a more sustained form of concentration. But I find this essay by Alain de Botton, which is called On Distraction, to be a very helpful essay in terms of contemplating our current situation. I just want to read a short excerpt from it this evening. One of the more embarrassing and self-indulgent challenges of our time is the task of relearning how to concentrate. The past decade has seen an unparalleled assault on our capacity to fix our minds steadily on anything, to sit still and think without succumbing to an anxious reach for a machine has become almost impossible. The obsession with current events is relentless. We are made to feel that at any point, somewhere on the globe, something may occur to sweep away our old certainties. Something that, if we fail to learn about it instantaneously, could leave us wholly unable to comprehend ourselves or our fellows. We are continuously challenged to discover new works of culture, and in the process, we don't allow any one of them to assume any weight in our minds. The need to diet, which we know so well in relation to food, and which runs so contrary to our natural impulses, should be brought to bear on what we now have to relearn in relation to knowledge, to people, and ideas. Our minds, no less than our bodies, require periods of fasting. For those of you friends who might like to read the essay in its entirety, you can find the link also on the Compassion Ocean Sangha Facebook group, or you can look it up by its title, On Distraction. And I really do recommend it. It's a lovely essay. Right concentration brings stillness to our mind by unifying our mind through developing our innate capacity. And it is an innate capacity. It's one somehow that we need to rediscover and re-nurture, but it's an innate capacity to dwell with an undistracted focus on a suitable object. This quality of dwelling with, of abiding with, is an important aspect of samadhi, of concentration, of immersion, and particularly of meditative concentration. It's easeful and it's delightful. There's really no more efforting needed when we're in the state of concentration. It's like resting our backs against the trunk of a shady tree on a hot day, or plunging into a cool lake when the weather is hot. The path factor, the Noble Eightfold path factor of right samadhi, concentration or immersion, works together with the path factors of right effort and right mindfulness. Right effort provides the energy, of course. Right mindfulness, the steadying points for awareness. There's a nice, I'm still trying to transform my overuse of the word powerful, so I'll use nice. There's a nice story in the commentaries which can help us to see how these three factors in the Sila Kanda, the Sila section of the Noble Eightfold Path, depend on and support each other. Three children go to a park to play, and while walking along, they see a tall tree which has fruit at the top. They decide that they want to pick some of the ripe fruit, but the fruit is beyond the reach of even the tallest child. So then one friend bends down and offers their back. The tallest child climbs onto the back of the friend, but the fruit is hard to grasp, and as she stretches, she feels as if she's going to lose her balance. So then the third child comes over and offers their shoulder to lean on. So in that way, by working together, the three children can pick the fruit easily. The first child, standing on the back of the second child, leaning on the shoulder of the third child, reaches up and gathers the fruit. In this simile, the child who reaches up and picks the fruit represents concentration, samadhi, and its function of unifying our mind into one direction. This is the direction of liberation and not the band of the same name. I just thought I should clarify. So it unifies our mind in one direction. But nothing can exist by itself alone. And to unify our mind, samadhi, concentration, or immersion, depending on what translation you feel fits better for you, needs concrete support. It doesn't exist by itself alone. The energy provided by right effort, which is like the child who offers their back as the foundation for the two other children. Samadhi also requires the stabilizing awareness provided by mindfulness, which is like the child who offers their shoulder. When right concentration, right samadhi, receives this support, then energized by right effort and balanced by right mindfulness or appropriate attention, it can draw in all the scattered strands of thought, all the areas of our mind that are going in all directions, and we're able to fix our mind firmly on one object. A while back, when we were enjoying together our series on the 7 factors of awakening, one of the factors we contemplated was energy, virya in Pali. Energy, virya, the mental factor which is closely related to right effort, can appear in either helpful or not yet helpful forms. The same factor, energy, can give rise to generosity, to nonviolence, to kindness and understanding on the one hand, or desire, aggression, violence, and so on the other. So right effort is a wholesome form of energy. But just saying that is not very helpful or concrete, is it? To be more specific, at its core, right effort is directing energy and attention towards nurturing and maintaining beneficial states of mind and being that's directed to our liberation from suffering. Please remember this, since it's very important. It's probably one of the most important points of this talk. If you forget everything else, please remember this little section. Right effort is directing your energy and attention, not everybody else's energy and attention, your energy and attention, towards nurturing and maintaining beneficial states of being and consciousness directed towards your liberation from suffering. I really feel, as I hinted at just a moment ago, that one of the most important words in this little explanation of right energy, right effort, is the word your. When in the sentence and the phrase your energy. Many of us are quite good. In fact, we're experts on having ideas and suggestions on how other people should direct their energy. On what transformation should be for another person, a group of people, or a nation, or even our neighbors. However, here we're talking about our own transformation. This tendency to focus outside can often be a hidden aspect of ego, the tendency to want to create others in our own image. Your energy, our energy, my energy, transforming the world and others goes hand in hand with transforming ourselves. The two must go together, otherwise we run the risk of just recreating the whole cycle of suffering over and over again. As we come into our exploration of right effort, I keep recalling one of the wonderful aspects of the Buddhist path, and that is that it's a spiral journey. It's a spiral path. It's not a journey that's a straight journey from point A to point B, but rather a journey of continual unfolding that helps us, as we return to the same points over and over again, to experience them in deeper and more profound ways. Remember that I shared in the very first talk in this series on the Noble Eightfold Path that we will again and again on our journey through the Eightfold Path, and indeed our journey through our spiritual life, return over and over again to right view. All roads in Buddhism return to and rely on the development and refining of this energy of right understanding or clear view. This is one of the reasons that when we first settled here, I felt it was important somehow to name this hamlet where we brothers stay as Clear View, because all roads lead to it and run through it. for beneficial or right energy to become a contributor to the path, in terms of the Noble Eightfold Path, it needs to be supported and guided by the two Noble Eightfold Path factors of right view and right intention, and to work alongside the other path factors. And we've explored in some detail right view in Buddhism and right intention. So in order for right effort or right energy to be beneficial and to be actually part of the Noble Eightfold Path, it needs to be informed and supported by right view and right intention. So where does energy itself come from? A couple of years ago, I was in a gas station in California, a petrol station, and there was a bottle of water called Buzz. It was caffeinated water. And so that's one possible answer for sure. But I doubt that caffeinated water is a contributing factor to the path of liberation. Right energy as a path factor is quite different than right buzz. Rather, in Buddhism, energy as a transformative factor, as a factor that will transform our life and become a noble factor, a factor of the Noble Eightfold Path, comes from engaging mindfulness and that sense of curiosity that we call, in the technical terms, investigation. Right effort, not too hard, not too loose, is crucial, since in Buddhism, we are constantly reminded of our own capacity to transform our situation. In fact, we see the Buddha as someone who has done what he can by pointing out the path for each one of us to liberate ourselves from suffering. But the rest involves us actually putting that path into practice. Putting the path into practice, as much as we would somehow wish it to be different, means focusing our energy and attention on cultivating our own mind and heart, or as Tay puts it very beautifully, tending the garden of our heart. Self-cultivation, while often delightful, is not always easy. But the Buddha and other ancestral teachers constantly remind us that anyone here meets each one of us, not other people, but each one of you, who follows the Noble Eightfold Path. And anyone who discovers this path right in the heart of our own lives can accomplish exactly the same thing, and will accomplish exactly the same thing: liberation. And what's needed is right effort, not hard labor. The willingness to step off the comfortable couch of our own habit energies, our unconscious and habitual ways of doing things that provide us with an endless round of false comfort, and to actively engage with our edge. The edge for each one of us is different. The edge might mean opening our heart to and forgiving that person. The edge might be learning how to put something down gently so we don't make a crash throughout the place. The edge might be walking slowly. The edge might be engaging with our fear, transforming our despair. Wherever the edge is, it's different for each one of us. This area of growth. It's making the determination not to give up on yourself, not to give up on your liberation or on your own capacity to liberate yourself in each and every moment. Not at some point in the future, 20, 30 years or 2 million years in the future, but to liberate ourselves, to experience peace, happiness, and joy in each and every moment. The Buddha told you that you can do it. Now it's up to you. It's up to each one of us. And as practitioners, we're invited to just do it. Let's have a sound of the bell. I really like that phrase, that practice slogan, just do it. And I want to say that I think it's important for each one of us, while just doing it, just getting down to really putting our mindfulness practice into concrete terms in our daily life, to ask ourselves what the it is for each one of us in our lives. What's that place that's difficult, that we don't want to look at, that we will do anything except direct our attention towards? What's that place that's slightly uncomfortable? If it's not a big thing, maybe it's slightly uncomfortable, that we retreat from, and that we go back to the familiar all the time. Where are we called into greater growth? That's the it. Remember earlier I spoke about the great disciples of the Buddha sharing that they have done what needed to be done, and asking ourselves this phrase, like, what is it I need to do? Like in each moment, where is it I need to focus my attention, is really crucial, since we can get caught up in doing all kinds of unnecessary things. But if we know what it is we most need to do and what we don't need to do in each moment, that's already a moment of awakening. That's a moment of liberation right there. Right effort as a path factor, as a factor of the Noble Eightfold Path, consists of 4 aspects. And we've spoken about this earlier, but we'll delve a little bit more deeply into these factors this evening. The first is to prevent the arising of unarisen, unwholesome, or unhelpful states. The second is to let go of unhelpful states that have already arisen. The third is to nurture wholesome states or helpful states that have not yet arisen, to bring them into being. And the fourth is to maintain and to bring to fruition helpful states that have already arisen. So the not yet wholesome or the unhelpful states here, the akusala dhamma, are the thoughts, the emotions, the intentions that are not in line with an intention or an aspiration to liberate ourselves and others from these repeating patterns of suffering. And we explored this when we looked at right intention a few weeks ago. The wholesome states, kusala dhamma, are states of mind and heart in line with our deepest aspiration of liberation or happiness or freedom. In terms of right effort, each of the 2 kinds of mental states, the helpful and the not yet helpful or unhelpful, has 2 associated practices. If by applying mindfulness and investigation, we realize for ourselves that a mental state that is lying dormant in our consciousness, that's not activated at this moment in time, is unhelpful, then we practice to not water it. We begin to identify what triggers it, and we do our best not to stimulate that mental formation. If the unwholesome or unhelpful mental, physical, or verbal action has already or is occurring and we recognize it, then in terms of right effort, we do our best to let go of, or to use the technical term, abandon it. Since we know it's already creating suffering for ourselves, it's probably creating pain for another person or group of people. And we know it's not in line what we most want. So it becomes easy to turn slightly, to turn away and to choose something different. The 2 practices around wholesome mental formations or helpful mental formations that we recognize as factors that lead towards liberation are nurturing and maintaining. We nurture, we selectively water the undeveloped helpful factors so that they can be brought into being. And then we maintain and develop these qualities. Once they've been brought into being, we nurture and maintain these qualities. We allow them to ripen to full maturity. So let's have a look. Let's go through each of these 4 factors of right effort. The first is to prevent the arising of unarisen, unhelpful states. So the first aspect of right effort is based on us recognizing within our own lives how the 5 hindrances, which we've explored in depth earlier in an earlier series, manifest as certain words, thoughts, and actions. So I'll just mention the 5 hindrances here briefly, since we've explored them in depth. But here, in order to understand this first aspect of right effort, then we will be using the lens of looking at the 5 hindrances to, as we were invited when we explored these 5 hindrances throughout those weeks that we were looking at them, to use the 5 hindrances as a lens to look and examine the roots of where our different words, our thoughts, and our actions come from. So the 5 hindrances are sensual desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, or dullness and drowsiness, restlessness and worry, and skeptical doubt. I personally consider the recognition and the transformation of these hindrances as the vast majority of our field of practice. I believe I even referred to them as interesting and humorous opportunities to practice. The first 2 hindrances, sensual desire and ill will, are the 2 strongest in most of us of the hindrances, the biggest challenges to our meditative growth. And they spring from, respectively, the unhelpful roots in our consciousness of this mind of always seeking. Sometimes we translate it as greed, this root of greed. And also from ill will or aversion. So sensual desire and ill will springing out of the root of greed and aversion. The other 3 hindrances, which are a little less strong in most of us, emerge from the root of delusion or confusion, or sometimes it's translated as ignorance, but I tend to like translating it as delusion a little more, since ignorance can just mean not knowing something, but delusion is seeing something, but seeing it in a mistaken way. Usually when these other hindrances arise from the predominant root of delusion, they rise in conjunction with other hindrances. Sensual desire here is interpreted in 2 ways. Sometimes it's understood in a kind of a narrow sense as running after pleasant sights and sounds and smells and tastes and touches, and running away from anything that we perceive as being slightly uncomfortable or unpleasant. But there's a deeper way, perhaps, of looking at this. By looking at how tanha, craving or thirst, manifests in all its modes, whether for sense pleasures, whether for wealth, for power, position, for fame, or anything else it can settle upon. Sometimes literally anything else. This is one of the big tendencies of our mind, to never be fulfilled or satisfied with what we have. The second hindrance is ill will or aversion. It can range from even a slight closing down of our heart towards ourselves or others, or to full-blown anger or rage or resentment and so on, towards other people, towards situations, towards objects, or for many of us, towards ourselves. The third hindrance, sloth and torpor, or dullness and drowsiness, are 2 factors that are connected together by a kind of a mental unwieldiness or a stiffness in our mind. So at the complete other end of the spectrum is the 4th hindrance, which is restlessness and worry. And this too is a compound thing with 2 aspects linked together with the common feature of being agitated in different ways. The 5th hindrance is skeptical doubt, which is a chronic cynicism and indecisiveness and so on. And it's not the reflecting on things with intelligence and experience, which was actively encouraged by the Buddha, but just this persistent unwillingness and inability to commit ourselves to a course of spiritual training or any kind of positive direction due to lingering doubts concerning the Dharma, the path, the Buddha, and so on. But most of all, I would say it's doubts about our own capacity to transform our situation. The first effort to be made regarding the hindrances as we notice the roots of different thoughts, words, and actions as they arise is the effort to prevent unarisen, unwholesome factors from arising. The practice is an essential one throughout the whole of our spiritual life, since the hindrances arise from deep within. Usually what stimulates the hindrances to arise as various mental formations or actions is sensory input. And more specifically, our unconscious reaction to sensory input. Sights, sounds, smells, tastes, and so on. Our mind tends to relate to sense impressions in different ways, which are determined primarily by the way that we attend to or we take care of them. We'll consider this more deeply next week when we consider appropriate attention. But if we attend carelessly and unwisely with inappropriate attention, ayoniso manasikara in the Pali, sights, sounds, smells, tastes, touches, and so on will tend to stir up primarily unhelpful associations and states. They do this either directly through their immediate impact or indirectly by triggering various associations based on our past experience, or as I've shared earlier, the past experience of our family, our ethnic experiences, our cultural experiences, and so on. The Buddha teaches as a concrete practice an exercise called guarding the senses. In the Anguttara Nikaya, we read, when she perceives a form with the eye, a sound with the ear, an odor with the nose, a taste with the tongue, an impression with the body, or an object with the mind, she doesn't get caught in the form or the particulars. Rather, she watches over her senses and she guards her senses. That's in the Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 4. Guarding the senses here doesn't mean retreating into a total withdrawal from the sensory world. This is impossible. And even if it could be achieved, the real problem wouldn't be solved or even dealt with. And honestly, it would also be an act of ill will or aversion in itself. This would be springing out of the root of ill will. The hindrance is our own response, not the sense object itself. The hindrance, again, is our own response, not the sense object itself. The key to guarding our senses is indicated in the phrase in the reading we just did of not getting caught in the form or the particulars. The form or the sign, nimitta, is the object's general surface appearance. A table, the general appearance of a table, for example. And then the particulars are its less conspicuous features, or even a broader interpretation of the particulars is our response, our inner response. For example, when I see a table and that's the sign, I call it the outer appearance is that it's a table and the conventional designation is a table. Then to me, I have my own associations with a table, the way I've experienced tables in my life and so on. So those are the two aspects, not getting caught in the form and not getting caught in our interpretation. if we don't practice to guard our senses, to develop this capacity to become aware of sensory input, what's coming in through our eyes and ears and our nose, our tongue, our body, and to examine how we respond to those sensory inputs and what they're triggering, then our mind just roams all over the place. First, it grasps onto the sign, and then it sets all kinds of things into like a chain reaction. Then we get caught up in all the particulars, and then all of these things multiply and they thrive. So to guard our senses, it almost requires that mindfulness and clear understanding, clear view, be applied to the encounter with sense impressions and sense objects. Since actually, just to elaborate a little bit on the chain reaction, the encounter itself is not one thing. It's actually a series of things that occur in quick succession. The initial stages of an encounter are automatic functions. Don't worry, we won't get too Buddhist psychology in this talk, but I thought it'd be helpful. The initial stages are automatic. First, our mind focuses on an object, a sight, a sound, a taste, and so on. We use the example of a table. Or actually, here I have a camellia that was offered to me earlier today from the Sisters Hamlet. So you can imagine a camellia if you wish. Our mind focuses on an object, which could be a sight, it could be a sound, a taste, and so on. And this is happening in each and every moment. Then if that sensory object is strong enough that it makes an impression, our mind recognizes it, and then it examines it, and then it classifies it. Then those are kind of the automatic functions that, all things being equal, take place just one after the other as a basic function of the way that mind consciousness works. So right after classifying something, a space opens up in which, it might be a very brief space, but a space opens up in which there's an opportunity to choose a response. If we've developed mindfulness and this capacity of investigation, of curiosity, then we become increasingly sensitive to these moments of when our sense bases, our eyes, our ears, our nose, our tongue, and so on, come into contact with sense objects. And we notice how different seeds are stimulated. And as we become more sensitive, we notice that we're less prone to running this whole habitual cycle into the realm of mere images and representations, as we usually do. But we're actually able to, I think the phrase in the modern world is be an interrupter of that pattern. We're able to bring mindfulness to it and say, aha, I know what's going on. Let me just adjust my focus a little. When our mindfulness is not yet strong enough, or dare I say it, absent many times, unhelpful seeds springing from one or another of the hindrances might sprout up, or probably will sprout up. For example, if greed is touched, if a seed arising from the root of greed or thirst or craving in our consciousness is touched, we might become fascinated or obsessed by something that we find pleasant, a pleasant sound or a taste or a smell, or physical sensation, and so on. Or if ill will arises, a seed that's colored by the root of ill will, then we'll be disgusted or we'll shut down and so on. We'll have some aversion towards something that we perceive as disagreeable or unpleasant. If we've been lucky enough to be able to cultivate and develop mindfulness, and we apply mindful attention to our encounter with sense objects, then over time we become more sensitive to this process, and we're able to nip it in the bud before it can continue to develop. Mindfulness calms the hindrances by helping to keep our mind consciousness at the level of what is sensed. or as I like to describe it, bare experience, initially helping us to identify when we're interpreting or embellishing an experience, and later on, actually preventing our mind from embellishing the experience with ideas and formations arising out of greed, of ill will or aversion or delusion. So it's just like my styrofoam duck story, for those of you who've heard it. That's an example of a sense experience being interpreted and embellished from the root of delusion, of not seeing clearly. Quite literally, I was not seeing clearly. So with mindfulness as a guide, our mind can develop the capacity to comprehend sense objects just as they are without being carried away. So again, the first aspect is to not nurture unarisen, unhelpful states of mind or seeds in our consciousness that have not yet arisen, to not nurture them. Let's have a sound of the bell. The second aspect of right effort, again, is looking at how we deal with unhelpful seeds. And let's say our mindfulness hasn't been strong enough. We've already begun this chain reaction. We've come into contact with a sense object and a whole story has been developed. And actually, these things are happening each and every second. They're happening all the time. So it's just merely a matter of developing our capability of recognition of what's already taking place. So let's say this cycle has started. A seed has been stimulated, a mental formation that's unhelpful has emerged, that's not in line with our deepest aspiration. It's emerged, it's there, it's happening. And then, so the second aspect of right effort is dealing with this situation that we haven't been able to nip it in the bud and redirect our attention. It's come to manifest in some way. So despite the effort at guarding our senses, let's face it, unhelpful states of mind will most likely still surface. We shouldn't feel like a failure when that happens, but rather, I would say, I think we should congratulate ourselves. Not necessarily for having an unhelpful mental formation or action or word. I want to be clear about that, but to congratulate ourselves that we've recognized it. This is a great thing. I think we might even like to get a little bit excited about that, since it's the very ground for practice. When we recognize that an unhelpful mind state emerges, this is when the second form of right effort comes into play. The effort of abandoning or letting go of already arisen unhelpful states. So just like any good doctor or a pharmacist knows that there are different medicines suitable for different illnesses, so too the Buddha has different medicines for different hindrances. Some can be applied to all, but some are focused on a particular one. If we notice, for example, that the root of desire or greed has emerged in a general way, then a general remedy offered by the Buddha would be to contemplate impermanence. And that contemplation of impermanence gradually wears away at our underlying foundation of clinging, of grasping onto things. The unconscious idea that we all buy into, that the objects we hold onto are stable and durable, they're going to last forever. For desire in the form of lust, a strong antidote might be the contemplation of the impermanence and the unattractive nature of physical forms. Ill will, of course, for those of you who've been practicing in the sutra class, you'll know the answer to what the antidote for ill will is. It's the cultivation of the meditation on loving kindness, or metta. And that slowly transforms all the traces of hatred and anger towards others and ourselves through radiating unconditional friendliness, the wish that everybody be well and happy. Transforming dullness and drowsiness calls for a special effort to bring about energy. And the Buddha proposed quite a few methods. He proposed things such as visualizing light, getting up and doing a brisk period of walking meditation, reflection on death. Death comes unexpectedly, and so on. Or simply making a firm determination to continue, or as it's said in the text, traditionally, striving. Although I like to think of it, when I read the word striving, I like to think of it as keeping on, keeping on. In the Buddhist world, we often say that we should just keep inviting the temple bell, regardless of how we feel. It's a practice in itself to just show up. One of the greatest teachings I personally received about giving talks or retreats was to give the talk or the retreat even if nobody registered or nobody came. This builds up our determination and our Dharma energy. And I've come to realize over the last few months, it's actually a really good preparation for sharing through Zoom, since often we're sharing to an empty room, but there can be hundreds of people in their own rooms there as well. So just showing up. Restlessness and worry are most effectively countered by tuning our mind to a simple meditation object that tends to calm it down. The method usually recommended is anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing, attention to the inflow and outflow of the breath, or sensations in the body. Doing a body scan, becoming aware of all the different sensations is another very helpful meditation object. If we notice that skeptical doubt is arising, then the special remedy is investigation, curiosity, to make inquiries, to ask questions, and to study the teachings until the obscure points, the points that we're not clear about, become clear. So this is the first of the 5 methods for expelling the hindrances. Now, many of you who've been practicing in the Compassion Ocean Sangha and requested these teachings actually will know and have experienced that Buddhism is totally big on lists, that there's a lot of lists of things because Buddhism was transmitted orally for the first 500 or 600 years of its development. So the lists were a mnemonic device. So there's 3 of something, 5 of something else, 14 of something else, 250 of something else, 348 of something else. So it's just a way of remembering. So with the 5 hindrances, those of us who've been practicing for a while will be unsurprised to learn there are a list of ways to work with the hindrances once they've already arisen. There are 5 methods, and the first method was just shared. The one-to-one approach between a hindrance and a remedy. We identify what hindrance has arisen and we apply the specific remedy to that hindrance. That's the first method. So the other 4 approaches are a little more general. But you might also find them helpful. And if you're a list lover like me, you might also find this interesting. So the second method of dealing with unhelpful mental formations, unhelpful actions or states when they've arisen, it marshals the forces of what we call conscience, hiri, and respect for others, ottappa, or fear of harming ourselves or others to transform the unwanted state, the unbeneficial state. In Buddhism, these qualities of hiri and ottappa are actually considered to be the guardians of the world. They're considered to be great treasures. Um, we don't, it's quite hard to translate these two terms into English. Often they're translated in quite a negative way when we translate them into English. They're translated as shame and remorse, or which sound really negative. However, in Buddhist psychology, they're considered to be indeterminate. They're considered to be, depending on how you, what they lead to, what change they lead to. So as I shared, they're often considered to be great treasures. And one translation might be a sense of inner conscience and respect for others, or fear of harming ourselves and others. So having hiri and ottappa, or cultivating these qualities of hiri and ottappa in our mind, are very, very different. They're completely different from having remorse. In fact, those of you who have listened to the talks on the hindrances will recall that remorse itself is considered to be a hindrance. In fact, I mentioned it just a few moments ago, restlessness and remorse. Remorse itself is considered to be a hindrance. I may actually give a talk or two on these beautiful qualities of hiri and ottappa as we go down the path a little later, because they're beautiful qualities. Basically, we reflect on the thought or the mind state, and we consider its consequences until there's a moment of turning away from it. We consider it in line with our own conscience. How does it feel when we bring our attentiveness and our sense of conscience to that mind state? Does it really match? Will we feel good about it within ourselves? And then that sense of, if we engage in that action or continue to engage in that action, will it bring peace and happiness to self and others, or will it cause harm? And if we notice that it's causing harm, that turning away is ottappa. That turning towards what is beautiful, wonderful, and true is the manifestation of that sense of ottappa. The third method involves a deliberate diversion of attention. Parents know how to do this very well. And we've had parents coming to the mindfulness class on Sunday mornings, or coming here to the monastery with their children. And I've seen that parents are experts in this. If you don't have children, then just observe parents, because they do it without even consciously recognizing that they're doing it. It's traditionally called deliberately diverting attention. So when an unwholesome thought or mind state, an unhelpful state arises and wants to be noticed, instead of indulging it, we simply redirect our attention elsewhere, as if closing our eyes and looking away to avoid an unpleasant sight. In modern language, I guess we could say this is the talk to the hand, the face isn't listening kind of method of turning away, just not indulging it anymore. The fourth method, and you'll notice that each of these methods is becoming slightly stronger. The fourth method uses the opposite approach. Instead of turning away from, putting the hand up and turning away from the unwanted state, the unbeneficial state, we actually turn towards it. If we have some meditative stability, we have a strong sense of mindfulness, then we turn towards it as a meditation object, and we examine it. We examine it closely, and we investigate where it came from. When this is done, what happens is the thought quietens down and eventually disappears. When we put it under observation, when we turn towards it, it becomes tame. It stops rattling around somehow, because it's being seen for what it is. The fifth method, which is to be used only as a last resort, a very last resort, and hopefully few of us would get there, is vigorously restraining the unbeneficial state with the power of the will, in the way that a strong person might throw a weaker person to the ground and sit on their chest to keep them pinned down. That's what's described in the commentaries. So in other words, just as an easy way to remember this is the wrestling or the sumo method. The Buddha tells us that by applying these 5 methods with skill and care, we'll eventually become a master of all the pathways of thought. I also want to share that even though we went through that list of increasingly strong ways to redirect our attention, I think it's important not to create a battlefield or a war within ourselves, and not to approach the transformation of our heart and our mind like a game of Space Invaders, where we're trying to shoot something out of our consciousness or get rid of something. But rather, I would see it to be important to engage a sense of kindness, a sense of gentleness, and a sense of interest. Never forget this beautiful quality of investigation, curiosity, becoming curious about why things came to be. This is where the source of insight actually is. It's not just in really quickly shooting things out of our consciousness and never ever thinking about them again, but actually developing the capacity to understand what nurtured this mind state in me, and then how can I take good care of this energy, and what's the flip side of that energy? What does it have to teach me? Let's have a sound of the bell. So now we move on to the 2 factors that are considered to be the factors associated with beneficial or helpful mind states. So the third is to stimulate or to nurture unarisen beneficial or helpful states. So along with transforming unhelpful states, another aspect of right effort is cultivating wholesome states of mind, cultivating helpful and beneficial and lovely states of mind and heart. So this, like the way we apply our effort to transforming unhelpful states, also involves 2 divisions: the watering of wholesome states that haven't yet arisen, and the maturation, the bringing to fruition of wholesome states that have already arisen. Though the helpful states to be developed can be grouped in various ways, I'm sure you will understand, such as serenity and insight, the 4 foundations of mindfulness, the 8 factors of the Noble Eightfold Path, and so on. The Buddha really emphasized a special group of these qualities. I wonder if you can guess what they are. Just take a breath. That's right. The 7 factors of awakening, which we spoke about earlier. We had a chance to do a whole series on the 7 factors of awakening. So these factors are considered to be some of the most beneficial factors, the most wholesome factors that we can nurture and develop as mind states, as being states in our consciousness and our way of being. I'm sure since we've covered the 7 factors of awakening in an earlier series that everybody's well on their way to developing these qualities already. So we don't need to go over them very much. Mindfulness, investigation, which we've spoken about repeatedly this evening, energy, joy, ease, concentration, and equanimity. So these 7 qualities are called the factors of awakening because they lead to awakening, and they also constitute awakening itself. In the preliminary stages of our path, they prepare the way. They're the raft in a sense. But in the end, they remain as the components of awakening itself. The Buddha actually shares, for anybody who wonders what awakening is, the Buddha shares that awakening itself is these 7 components nurtured and brought to complete fruition, working in unison. In Plum Village, we call this aspect of nurturing helpful states, these beneficial states of being, as selective watering, choosing to nourish the seeds that we want to see in our garden, the garden of our mind and our heart. So as mind states emerge, we bring our mindfulness to notice what we're thinking, what we're feeling, what we're experiencing, and we examine them a little bit. And if we notice that they're in line with our aspiration, we begin to consider what their roots are and how do they relate to the 7 factors of awakening. And we do our best to examine and explore what triggered those mind states, to figure out how they came to be, and then to do our very best to be able to stimulate those mind states or those seeds as often as possible. And then the 4th aspect of right effort is to maintain arisen, beneficial or helpful states. So the last of the 4 right efforts aims at maintaining the arisen beneficial factors and bringing them to full ripeness and maturity. Traditionally, in the text, it's called the endeavor to maintain. And it is explained as the effort to keep firmly in our consciousness a favorable mind state that has already arisen. So it's like as if we've received a beloved friend who's come to visit. And we want to do all we can to keep them as long as possible. We serve them tea, we serve them cakes, we hide their car keys, we let down their tires and so on. I'm just kidding. But when we notice that we have a wonderful mind state that has developed, then not only do we allow it to be there, we explore and we experiment, we fine tune. We tune up or we tune down our practice, as we learned about when we explored earlier in the Factors of Awakening series about effort. We learned how to tune up and tune down our practice. And so in this same way, we experiment with tuning up and tuning down various factors to see how we can nurture this mind state for as long as possible. If we're experiencing happiness, if we're experiencing peace, if we're experiencing ease and joy and so on, these are wonderful states of being, compassion. And we do our very best to identify the trigger and then to tune up and tune down so that we can nurture and we can bring it to fruition. We can help it to develop, help it to grow, help to nurture it. So these 4 factors are the factors that make up right effort as a factor of the Noble Eightfold Path. Please remember not to work too hard, but to constantly examine the pitch of your practice. Just like a skilled musician will learn how to tune the pitch up and down. So dear family, I do hope that this evening's talks have been helpful for you, that you've gotten something beneficial. It's certainly been a delight to be together with you. I look forward to everybody's explorations of right effort as we go through this week of practice together. Please take very good care wherever you might be, and we'll end with the sound of the bell.